How's it going tonight, sir?
It's going well. How are you?
Okay, now that the ruckus is gone. Um, Tonight, with Genesis 37 through 40, roughly. Um,
Very roughly.
yep. The titled this one, The Inescapable Dream, a walk through the word Genesis. Um, some interesting thoughts tonight. Did some reading, learned me some things that I had been taught wrong. It was interesting.
No, you weren't taught wrong.
I was definitely misinformed by people who must have skimmed over things.
We'll
So,
we'll flesh that out later.
all right, ready? Go, go.
So today we're focusing on one of the most confusing and super important parts in the Torah. This is the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses. But before I start, I want to admonish all of our viewers to be this one thing: apostolic. Be apostolic. What does apostolic actually mean? It simply means to follow the teachings of the apostles. So the doctrine the apostles gives. Anyway, I've heard it both ways. The doctrine that the apostles give to the entire world, that's the doctrine that we must follow. You can find it in the New Testament writings. Um, and I just admonish our viewers, be apostolic. Okay. So here's what we're going to examine. We're going to examine the text and what it actually says happened. We're going to examine why Reuben's response seems super strange. We're going to talk about these Midianite traders that randomly show up, and how this event sets up the next week's portion or exploration of dreams. We're really going to get into dreams, so I'll briefly touch on that, and then I don't know, we might come back through that later, but next week is a lot more about dreams and where Joseph's life goes. So this is basically the end of the Pentateuch, the end of the Torah, or the end of the book of Genesis in the Pentateuch and Torah, is centered on the life of Joseph. Joseph takes the main stage, and there's only a small chapter in there that's kind of super random. We'll talk about that chapter later. That's Yehuda and Tamar, or Judah and Tamar.
Yeah.
And what's this chapter doing here? Why are we talking about? We're in the middle of Joseph's story. What are we talking about? So we'll go over that later, and maybe next week. So, moving on, the inescapable dream. So Joseph has these 2 dreams. The first one is found in Genesis 37 and 7, and it says, or Joseph says, there were binding sheaves in the field. Then suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright when your sheaves gathered round and bowed to my sheaf. So imagine hearing your younger brother tell you that.
Yeah.
So then moving on to verse 9, he said he dreamed another dream and told it to his brother, saying, "Look, I have had another dream. And at this time, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." So these 2 dreams are pretty troubling to not only Joseph, but I'm sorry, well, Joseph is a little bit troubled by them, but not only Joseph's brothers, but his mother and father as well.
Yeah.
And we would argue um, that Leah and Rachel were also observers of this. So maybe if we do this again next year, we can dive deeper into that narrative and see how Leah and Rachel are viewing the Joseph and Jacob story. So anyway, Genesis 37:18 through 20, it says they conspired against him to kill him. Now, this is after they've heard the dreams. Jacob actually sends Joseph down to Dothan, and there's a mysterious figure that Joseph actually meets in a field. We have no idea who this dude is. We just know that this guy is a random guy. And Joseph speaks to him, and he says, "Go down to Dothan. That's where your brothers are. They just got done killing all these people," and we learn about that later on. So, anyway, so moving forward, in the midst of this, Joseph's brothers see him, they capture him, and this is where they conspired to kill him. The brothers' original plan is elimination, not selling. Judah is the one that actually comes up with this on his own. He says, "Let's kill him." So they see Joseph coming, and essentially Joseph is there to spy on them per Jacob. Uh, so of course, they're like, we got to get rid of this dude. Like he's doing way too much right now. So have you ever had a boss that was just over the top? Well, Joseph's the boss. So they call him the Master of Dreams, which is a mocking name. That you found this in Hebrew. Then they say, "Come, let us kill him, and we will see what becomes of his dreams." So the dreams are at the center of their rage. Remember that. That'll
Okay.
help us later on in the next couple of weeks. So Reuben comes up with a plan. This is Genesis 37:21 and 22. Reuben then steps in his mind. He says in his own mind, this is what the text says. He says in his own mind, let us not strike him down. Or actually, I'm sorry, he suggests to his brothers this first. He says, "Not let us not strike him down." He says, let's actually just throw him into this pit. And the text reveals his hidden purpose. So Reuben in his mind is thinking, in order to rescue him and return him later to his father, Reuben is not actually ready to confront his brothers head on. So instead, he tries to save Joseph indirectly.
Yeah.
Um, his goal is to quietly restore Joseph back to Jacob and regain favor as the firstborn. So, Reuben has his own ideology of what he should be doing, right?
Yes.
So, um, now we'll get into Genesis 37:25 through 27. Judah has this shift of thought where at first he was going to murder him, and then Judah sees the text says a caravan of Ishmaelites. Judah proposes a new idea. He says, "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites."
Yes.
Judah's logic is pragmatic, and we get the guilt off of our hands, and we actually gain something. So we're going to sell him into slavery. We'll get some money from him, and we'll dip his coat in some blood, and that kind of thing. So, and at this point, the other brothers actually agree to sell Joseph, but then something unexpected actually takes place. So you have Genesis 37:28. This is where things get a little bit
Yeah.
tricky here. So I'll read this kind of slowly. So the text says, then Midianite traders passed by, and then they pulled Joseph up. I want us to pay attention to that they there. Troy, you saw
Yep.
this last week, right?
Yep. I did.
And they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. So this moment is extremely ambiguous. Now, this is just speculation. I'm making this assessment, and Troy will back me up on this. The text never actually says the brothers pulled him up. The brothers actually sold him. Instead, it reads as if the Midianites acted on their own, discovering Joseph in a pit with no one watching. Now, um, oh yeah, we're gonna go that route.
Okay.
So, well, there's another part to this, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so, um, so instead, the narrative reads the Midianites acted on their own. They discovered him with no one watching. So the text says that they went off to eat lunch, and we don't know how far off they go. But there's another story later on in the Joseph narrative that we'll pick up in a couple of weeks, and I'll give you this answer. But if those of you who are analytical thinkers, you can go ahead and read it through. But it's when Joseph reappears to his brothers as the Egyptian official, and I'm not going to give you that just yet. But hang on, in a couple of weeks we'll go back over that. Um, so uh, one thing that one of the rabbis I like to frequent points out is that this is a highlighting that the Torah is trying to make. Human plans are chaotic. God's plan unfolds through unexpected channels. So this also explains Reuben's reaction, right?
Right.
So we're going to talk about Reuben's reaction. This is Genesis 37:29 through 30. Reuben returns to the pit. This implies that he was not present during the Midianite encounter. Otherwise, they ran off to lunch. How far they went, I believe they went far enough away that they could not hear him screaming down in that pit because he's upset, right? Who
Right.
wouldn't? That will have a lot to play in with what we do in a couple of weeks here. So, implies that Reuben, and the others are not present. Reuben, is expecting Joseph to still be inside of the pit once he arrives back to it. When he sees the pit is empty, he does a specific thing. The text says he tears his garments. Now, this is also going to be very important for another story way over in the New Testament when we talk about a certain person that goes on trial for something that the Jews say he did that was unforgivable, and a certain individual rips their garment. We'll talk about that later. I'm just laying some groundwork here. You'll probably even forget that I said that. I'll bring it back to your memory. And I don't know. We'll just have to see how that plays out. But anyway,
Okay.
he rips his garments when he sees the pit is empty, and he says, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go? He was in my care, he was in my charge, and I have no idea where this guy is. He's completely wiped out, he's completely gone." So Reuben's grief is strange. If he helped sell Joseph, uh, then why did he intended to rescue Joseph? Then what I'm saying makes a lot of sense. Reuben feels personal failure. He feels the loss of honor as the oldest and fear of Jacob's judgment. Um, so he doesn't say we shouldn't have sold him. He says, I failed to save him.
Yep.
And this is because he never anticipated uh, sale from the Midianites, right? So if we slow down and we read the text, I think it's safe to say that we can argue, and we're making just an argument, of course, that Joseph wasn't actually sold by his brothers. He was sold
Correct.
by these Midianite travelers. Now, you might be asking me, well, doesn't the Bible say, does the other people that are talking about other stories in the Bible actually say that Joseph's brothers sold Joseph into slavery? Good question. I'm not going to answer it. Thank you for asking it, though. We'll get to that at another time. So, who are the Midianites and why does this matter? The text mentions Ishmaelites. Those are descendants of who? Ishmael, right?
Right.
Which is one of the sons of, you guessed it, Abraham. I was waiting on you, Troy. I thought you had that one.
Like I said, been up since 4 o'clock, so
It's okay. That's
we're a
fine.
little slow in the uptake.
That's all right. So Midianites are descendants of Midian, which was a son of Abraham. Midianite merchants, possibly a subgroup of Midianites. So ancient caravans often traveled as mixed groups, both for safety and trade. So one of the key takeaways I want us to get is these Midianites likely acted independently. They found Joseph, they pulled him out, and they sold him, and without the brothers' involvement completely.
Yeah.
So this would arguably solve. Judah thinks that they sold him. He assumes his plan was carried out. Reuben thinks that Joseph is gone because he wasn't there. The brothers' guilt later in another story will confess to what we're saying is actually the case. We'll get to that later, and those that want to know, that's in Genesis 45 and 8. Um, and Joseph actually tells them kind of what happens, but we'll talk about next week. We're going to talk about why weren't there any letters from home, um, and how did this disastrous story go from bad to worse. So uh, there's some blurring of human actions to highlight a divine direction. This whole thing could have been avoided had we actually just been our brother's keeper. And that's really the takeaway from this. When we decide we are important and someone else's rights aren't more important than our own, and I'm not trying to sound like, a far left individual, by the way, but I am trying to stay kind of towards the middle of this thing. Other people have rights. We have rights as well. My right shouldn't infringe on your rights, and your rights shouldn't infringe on mine.
Yeah.
Can we live in a Torah worldview where I love my neighbor as myself, and I care for my neighbor, and I am my brother's keeper, but I might disagree? There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Just know that you might see things a certain way, but you don't have to be overtly boisterous towards anyone because they don't agree with you. You
Okay.
can simply say, "Hey, you know what? I don't agree with that, but I love you, and we'll just keep we'll just keep sharpening iron." You know what I mean?
Yep. I love you, but you have the right to be wrong.
Well, you could say that too, but um, and some things are black and white, but there's a lot of gray area stuff. And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily about being right or wrong, but the right thing is loving your neighbors yourself and being your brother's keeper. So I might not agree with somebody, but that doesn't mean that I need to go be rude to them. I don't need to have an anger session with them or a battle with them. There doesn't need to be a war. It's simply, hey, we don't agree on this one part, but let's live in harmony together on things that we can agree with. And
Yes.
that's and I would argue any level-headed person is going to agree with that. If you're not level-headed, then I'll pray for you. So we're going to set up next week because we're almost out of time here. Um, Everything that happens here traces back all the way to these dreams that Joseph has.
Yeah.
Um, in the dream, his sheaf rises. In reality, he is lowered into a pit. In the dream, his brothers bow. In reality, they stand over him as he cries for mercy. In the dream, he is elevated. In reality, he is sold like property. This tension is the point. The fulfillment of the dream begins as the opposite of the dream. The brothers think they are killing the dream, but instead they are participating in its actual fulfillment. Crazy how you think you're doing what you want to do, but God is in the background orchestrating everything. And
Yep.
there's another thing that we could bring up to talk about that, but God's always in control. You're never in control. You'll never be in control. Just giving you the heads up. God is always in control all of the time, every time.
Yep.
So this sets up next week as we're going to move into Joseph interpreting dreams in prison. He'll later interpret Pharaoh's dream, how these dreams become the framework for God's plan, and we'll see that dreams themselves were never just predictions. They were the blueprints for Joseph's entire life journey.
Yeah.
So, um arguably, here's the takeaway. Joseph actually wasn't sold by his brothers. Somebody else actually sells him, but I need to be my brother's keeper. And we'll see why in the world does the Bible actually say they sold his brother into slavery. Um,
Correct.
and we will kind of flesh out what do these dreams actually mean. And the reason why I titled this the Inescapable Dream is because Joseph's dreams, if you put yourself in Joseph's shoes, Joseph's dreams go from bad to worse when the sale of Joseph actually takes place. He starts out on his way to do what he's always done. He shares the dreams. He goes down to get his brothers. His brothers capture him. They throw him into the pit, and then this Groundhog Day, unseemly timeline of events starts taking place where things go bad from worse. He ends up in Egypt. He gets this whole Potiphar thing goes on. That's how you would say his name in Hebrew. Potiphar thing happens. He gets thrown into the prison. He's there for God knows how long. And not until Pharaoh pulls him up out of that pit does he actually realize, oh, this was the whole point of why I had those dreams.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that later on as we go. But again, those of you that want to read ahead, you can read ahead to see what exactly Ruben's actually arguing here. And I think that would give us a good context for what we're saying this week as far as where things are going and how things are being, um, you know, uh, into the Torah and the scriptures. And hopefully, I will go back and watch this, and I will pick out some of those Easter eggs that I landed. But if not, somebody comment and say, "Hey, you never told us about this. You gotta help us out here. We
Yep.
can't." See it. And if you do see it, then I don't care if you really give it away because it's not like it's like the whole three people watching anyway. So
Yeah.
uh, anyway, so moving on. Thank you for watching. I think we're at almost 19 minutes, so this one's kind of short. Next week and the week after will probably be a little bit longer.
Yep.
There's going to be a lot more content, but in order to set up those two things, we actually really need to set up the sale of Joseph and really talk about these different things that are going on. So, do you have any questions?
Nope. I'm good.
I'm glad you actually saw that. A lot of people kind of, what we like to do is we skim over it because we have these busy lives.
Yes.
And we skim over the text and we read it and then we move on. And you really don't begin to understand until you're in a place of serious grief and serious betrayal. You don't really begin to see things from the narrative of the biblical perspective. Now, when you've been betrayed by family, friends, or church family, you go back and you read the sale of Joseph and you're like, now I begin to see what's going on here.
Yep.
There's a purpose and a plan for every single thing, and God intentionally works What does the Bible say? All things for the good of those who are what? Called, right?
Yep.
So if you're called by God, God is orchestrating all of the bad stuff for the good of your purpose. And the sale of Joseph and Joseph's life is one big story. It's not the only story, but it's one big story that gives a testament to how God actually orchestrates behind closed doors. Notice here, I had a friend bring this up a couple of weeks ago. Notice that God never says anything to Joseph. There's not an active voice of God. He speaks to Abraham, he speaks to Isaac, and he speaks to Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
But he never actually audibly speaks to Joseph. However, Joseph is intentional, and we're going to begin to see that throughout the life of Joseph. So, um, I just spared us another minute. We're trying to keep these things really, really tight and close because we have lives outside of this.
Yep.
Uh, I work a lot, and Troy works probably more than I do. So, well, at least in the wintertime. You know, you might ask yourself, why are we doing these so much? And why are they so small? There's a whole lot to unpack, and there's so much more that we could share or that I could share. But in order to keep your brain engaged, in order to make sure your brain doesn't explode, and to not be on here for 45 minutes and give us time with our families and uh, the life that we live, we have to keep these kind of condensed and small. So um, anybody who is a good editing person, we'll hire you to do editing for us so we don't have to do that because it's very annoying, and I'm not good at computers.
Well, if Alex is paying, we'll hire you because there's no money being made here.
Yeah, there's zero money. So anyway, but we are appreciative of those who watch, and please comment questions, um, share this with friends and family, come back and read through some of these things. I would love to be able to share more of this, and we'll figure out how much longer we're going to do this for. So if you enjoy it, like it, subscribe, and share, and then we'll be able to get more content out and we'll be able to do more with that. So,
Yes.
okay, that's all I've got. That's it.
All right. Well,
Just say.
we will sign this one off for tonight. We're trying to figure out our Christmas schedule, just so you guys know. So it may be an off day for the next one, but we'll figure it out. We're probably going to pre-record a Christmas Day episode. It sounds like too. So, because Christmas Day is on Thursday, and that's the day we've set aside to do this. So,
Yep.
But thanks you guys for watching, and until next time, Grinch juice.
Grinch juice. Love it.